They don't have to kill you to destroy you. Controlling your emotions is enough. This is our world's unspoken bargain, the swap of brutality for subtlety, shackles for puppet strings. Ask yourself, who really holds power over you? Chances are, it's not the person with the loudest voice or the most obvious threats. Instead, it's the one who can press your buttons, whose words or silences can sculpt your mood, whose approval or disappointment drives your decisions. Why is this so? Could it be that we've misread the true nature of vulnerability and control in the modern era? Imagine the old forms of domination. When we look at history, it's chains, whips, and the direct spectacle of force that come to mind. Tyrants carved their will into flesh, and you knew precisely what was demanded of you. But power now wears a new mask, and it smiles benignly. Today, you may never see the hand that guides your behavior. Instead of bolts and bars, there are expectations, shaming glances, artfully dropped hints, a raised eyebrow from a boss, a parent's disappointed pause, the barrage of curated images on social media telling you how to look, how to feel, whom to envy, what to love or despair over. Emotional manipulation replaced violence because, in truth, it is often far more efficient and far less visible. Consider the guilt trip. A classmate sighs, "Well, I guess I'll do it myself." A friend posts an ambiguous status update, hoping you'll reach out. Or a company reminds you that only the best parents choose our product. How's that for a sales pitch? Each, in its own way, guides you not through force, but through the back door of feeling, responsibility, fear of abandonment, need for validation. What if I told you that you routinely act against your best interests, not from stupidity or weakness, but because someone else has quietly rearranged your emotional landscape? Have you recalled moments when you said yes, purely to avoid someone's disapproval, or when you covered up your real beliefs to keep harmony? Were those your choices or theirs? Here's the heart of it. The more deeply you feel, the more you open yourself to being moved by invisible hands. We are taught from childhood to wear our hearts on our sleeves, to empathize, to absorb pain and joy from those around us. Empathy is, after all, one of the highest virtues, or so we're told. But what if this very virtue doubles as a liability? Now, don't get me wrong. Empathy can build bridges, heal wounds, and connect us in profound ways. Yet, these same bridges can be commandeered. The generous friend who can't say no, the loyal employee drowning in extra work, the devoted child entangled in a parent's unspoken dreams. Aren't these the faces of emotional depth turned against itself? Let's not kid ourselves. Those who know how you tick, who sense your wounds and weaknesses, can nudge you gradually to betray your own interests. Sometimes you don't even notice. After all, the manipulation arrives masked as care, flattery, or simple, passionate argument. You want to be a good friend, a reliable partner, a kind neighbor, but somewhere along the way, you lose track of your own needs and borders. Why do we rarely pause to ask, is my willingness to feel, to care, making me stronger or more easily led? So here we are, perched on a philosophical cliff, peering into the nature of emotional depth itself. Is it the crowning virtue? What makes us gloriously human amid a mechanized world? Or the very reason we are so susceptible to subtle chains? In a manipulative world, is emotional richness a strength or a trap? This is not just a question for ethicists and armchair philosophers. It is a matter for you and me, for everyday decisions and the unseen bargains we make beneath the surface of our lives. Think back, just for a moment, to a time when your emotions betrayed you, when caring for someone or feeling deeply about something led you somewhere you didn't intend to go. Did you reflect on the forces at play, or merely chalk it up to being too sensitive? Whose narrative did you serve in that moment? This is where our journey begins, by questioning not just how we feel, but who writes the script that stirs those feelings in the first place. Are you the protagonist in your own story, or the unwitting side character in someone else's plot? If emotion is the steering wheel of the soul, who gets to drive? The paradox is sharp. The very qualities we celebrate as marks of a good person, kindness, empathy, emotional openness, might also be the qualities that make us vulnerable to manipulation, to being subtly controlled without even realizing it. Is it possible, then, that virtue and weakness travel in the same cloak? This is not to say we should harden our hearts or close ourselves off from the richness of feeling, but neither should we slip blindly into the hands of those who would harness our emotions for their own ends. So, I leave you with this. In a world where nobody needs to kill you to destroy you, where invisible strings tug at your every joy and sorrow, how will you guard your inner life? How will you tell the difference between genuine connection and the slow tightening of psychological chains? If controlling your emotions is the new means of control, what would it take to reclaim agency, not by numbing feeling, but by learning to recognize the script as it's written? Let's reflect honestly. Is emotional depth a treasure or a Trojan horse? As we move deeper into this philosophical investigation, I invite you to look back over your life, to find those moments when your heart led you astray, and to ask with fresh eyes who really held the pen in those chapters. In this age of smiling tyrants and velvet manipulation, perhaps the first act of freedom is simply to notice who or what is making you feel. Let us look more closely at the hidden architecture of emotional control. The mechanisms, when stripped of their subtlety, are almost embarrassingly simple. Love draws us in with warmth, fear cages us in icy anticipation, and guilt holds us in place, tethered by invisible chains. If you've ever found your decisions swayed, your convictions blurred, or your autonomy slipping through your grasp, there is a good chance it wasn't logic that led you astray, but emotion, leveraged, manipulated, weaponized. Consider, for example, the powerful distraction of love. In the hands of a skillful manipulator, love becomes more than a bond. It becomes an instrument. How often have you seen someone ignore glaring red flags simply because they are dazzled by affection? Or perhaps you have found yourself compromising your principles, letting someone else redraw your boundaries, excusing actions you would not tolerate from a stranger, all in the name of love. The seduction here is not merely emotional but cognitive. It erodes critical thought, clouds judgment, and enables blind loyalty. Love, the purest of human experiences, can become a Trojan horse for control. Next, consider fear, not the primal kind that flares in the face of mortal threats, but the social and existential fears that haunt us. The fear of rejection, of loneliness, of not belonging. These subtle terrors nudge us like invisible hands, steering us toward conformity and compliance. When logic loses its grip, when there are no reasonable arguments left, a manipulator turns to threat, real or implied. If you do this, you'll lose me. If you say that, no one will want you around. These threats are less literal than existential, bypassing our deliberative mind and burrowing into the sinews of our emotional being. And, underlying it all, guilt, the most insidious of restraints. Guilt whispers that you are not enough, that you owe something, that standing up for yourself is selfish, that others' comfort is worth more than your conscience. Manipulators excel at evoking guilt not through explicit blame, but subtle suggestion. A sigh, a downcast glance, a carefully recounted tale of how your actions have hurt them. Logic withers before such tactics. Reason is no match for the urge to absolve oneself by appeasing another. Look around. How many people do you know who react instantly to emotional stimuli without pause or question? How many forgive without thought to the consequences, let themselves be governed by an insatiable need to please, or love with a sort of reckless abandon, believing this is what it truly means to care? These are not simply kind or generous spirits, they are, unwittingly, open wounds for the world's sharp edges. Goodness without discipline can so easily become self-undoing. So what then, practically, is the remedy? Is the only alternative to shut ourselves off, harden our hearts, and live behind emotional walls? Not at all. Emotional discipline is not about numbing, nor is it about suppressing what makes us human. It is, rather, the art of detachment, not from feeling, but from the compulsion to react blindly. Imagine for a moment being able to acknowledge your love without surrendering your judgment, to recognize fear's presence but not let it dictate your course, to hear the voice of guilt and still sift its truth from its manipulation. This is emotional mastery, recognizing emotion for what it is, a powerful signal, but not always a wise guide. How does one begin? Like any discipline, it starts with awareness, with the smallest pause between stimulus and response. When you feel a surge of anger, ask, "What is this moving me toward?" When guilt pulls at your conscience, inquire, "Is this a call to true amendment or a tool for someone else's ends?" Practice meeting your emotions like an old friend greeting a visitor, welcoming, attentive, but no longer at their mercy. The real challenge is navigating the line between caring and being ruled by care. Do you love others so fiercely that you lose yourself? Or can you love while remaining whole? Compassion need not be self-annihilation. Forgiveness does not require you to forget, nor to submit endlessly in the face of hurt. Each emotion has its proper place in the architecture of a well-lived life, but none are meant to sit enthroned, unchecked. Emotional self-mastery, despite all caricatures, is not about building a cold fortress, nor cultivating apathy. It's about reclaiming your agency, the ability to decide rather than react on autopilot. When you understand your own emotions, their origins, and their usual pathways, you stop furnishing the world with predictable buttons for others to push. You cease being an easy target for those who would distract you with adoration, herd you with fear, or snare you with guilt. And so the task is not to deny your vulnerability, but to render it conscious, deliberate, and within your governance. In doing so, you move closer to true autonomy, not abandoned by caring, but elevated by it, less likely to be undone by the machinations of those who would harness your heart for their own designs. If you are mindful, if you practice discernment in the midst of your stormiest feelings, you might just find that your heart and mind together provide the clearest path, not to indifference, but to wise, compassionate strength. Now, let's step further into this labyrinth, beyond the familiar daylight where empathy and kindness are universally draped as the preferred vestments of the good. Isn't it striking when you stop to notice how often society doesn't simply praise empathy, it glorifies it? The empath is lauded as a paragon, an ideal, almost saint-like. Service, self-sacrifice, compassion. These are banners we are all but begged to carry, regardless of what it costs us personally. There's a seductive myth here, that empathy alone can save the world, that boundless kindness is the highest form of virtue. We post inspirational quotes, elevate selfless heroes, and nod when told that to understand all is to forgive all. But is this universally true, or have we overlooked something critical? Can you recall, perhaps, a time when your willingness to feel with or for another left you more depleted than enriched, tangled in obligations that left your own needs gasping for air? Let's probe beneath the surface of this golden ideal. Empathy, for all its merits, can be weaponized, subtly pressed into service not for healing, but for control. Consider for a moment how offices, families, and even friendships sometimes operate not as havens of mutual support, but as small theaters for manipulation. In these plays, empathy becomes the stage prop, beautiful, glittering, and perfectly placed to ensnare the unwary. The archetype of the endlessly kind, patient listener, always available, always absorbing others' emotional overflow, serves another's script. And manipulators, consciously or otherwise, are all too apt at writing themselves the starring roles. Picture this. Perhaps you recognize the feeling of being a fixer, the go-to confidant, the emotional sponge. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If empathy is unbounded, it becomes a current that can sweep the giver out to sea while allowing others to drift safely along. For in the wrong hands, empathy morphs into a lever. Those who recognize your willingness to absorb suffering may deploy ever more sophisticated forms of emotional blackmail. Pain and distress are paraded, not always for comfort or resolution, but to lower defenses, making you pliable, pushing you into action on their behalf. Are their wounds always authentic? Not necessarily. Sometimes it's a performance of suffering, an artful gesture to tug at your conscience and extract what they need: your compliance, your guilt, your unflagging support. This is the shadow side of empathy rarely discussed. Weaponized suffering. Does that phrase catch in your mind? It is real. Performative victimhood quickly degrades kindness into a currency. The more you give, the more is demanded, and each gift is rarely matched in kind. Suddenly, you're not in a symbiotic exchange, but a lopsided trade where your energy, time, and peace are drained without replenishment. Here's where something transformative can occur, though. It happens when you step back and observe rather than absorb. What if, instead of offering yourself as a perpetually open vessel, you approach these emotional dynamics with a certain detachment? Not coldness nor cruelty, but a gentle clarity. Ask yourself, is what's being asked of me truly a request for connection, or am I being baited, a hook dangling guilt, shame, or even flattery to catch my commitment? Mastering this awareness changes everything in the game of emotional warfare. The manipulator, depending on your reactions, your tears, your guilt, your pledges of rescue, suddenly finds the ground shifting beneath their feet. When you offer insight instead of immediate rescue or remain firm in your boundaries, you reorient the power dynamic. The emotional currency they expected to spend, your emotional labor, your distress, your feverish attempts to make it right, has suddenly lost its purchasing power. But how do we distinguish observation from absorption in the maelstrom of messy, real human relationships? It requires conscious practice. Imagine a colleague unloading worries week after week, seeking reassurance, absolution, a solution, always from you. Observe without stepping in. Listen, yes, but do not carry. Recognize the subtle cues, the guilt trip inherent in "you're the only one who understands," or the melodrama in "no one else cares." Is this flattery or a ploy to obligate your service? True kindness answers these games not with endless acquiescence, but with authenticity. I hear you, but this is something you must work through. It's a declaration of faith in their agency and a respectful guardian of your own reserves. Ultimately, genuine courage and kindness are not defined by infinite self-sacrifice. They require boundaries, lines drawn not out of indifference, but out of profound respect for oneself and others. Only through this clarity can empathy remain a gift, not a weapon turned against its giver. By refusing to play the manipulative games, by insisting on honesty and mutual care, we rescue not only ourselves, but even those accustomed to wielding suffering as a tool. For when kindness and strength entwine, we create space for real connection, a meeting of equals, each recognized in their whole humanity, neither martyr nor tyrant, but simply, finally, truly human. What if I told you that the greatest threats to your freedom aren't always external, laws, governments, social systems, but are often spun from the most intimate fibers of the human heart? That in our everyday encounters, it is not brute force or naked authority shaping our behavior, but a subtler, deeper force, emotional manipulation. How often have you found yourself caught in someone's smile, a tone of disappointment, a subtle nudge of guilt? How many of your decisions, your sacrifices, your quiet resentments have been shaped not by your own volition, but by the unseen hands of others tugging at your empathy? In a world where almost every interaction comes with a hidden agenda, can you say with certainty that your emotions belong to you alone? Think about the countless ways emotion shapes your trajectory. There's the coworker who always seems to delegate the most tedious tasks your way, cloaking their requests in tones of helplessness. There's the friend who showers you with attention and praise until you dare to assert a boundary, and suddenly you're awash in coldness and accusation. Or perhaps it's more subtle, a quiet social script pressed into you since childhood. Be agreeable, don't make waves, put others first. Isn't it unsettling to realize how often empathy, our supposed superpower, becomes the channel through which others access and direct our will? As we unravel this phenomenon, the pattern crystallizes. Emotional manipulation, that gentle but relentless insistence on your attention and energy, is the principal means of social control in modern life. No physical chains are necessary. A sigh, a frown, or a calculated silence is often enough to leash the spirit of the unwary. The unguarded empath is especially vulnerable. For those of us who pride ourselves on sensitivity, who believe that openness is virtue, the cost is all too real. We become legible, readable, even to the most casual observer, a walking instruction manual for those who wish to open our hearts and extract what they need. Have you noticed how the people who most consistently drain you seem to know exactly which buttons to press and when? But what if there were another way? What if, instead of being on autopilot, reflexively responding, always available, always giving, you could summon an inner detachment? Not the numbness of apathy, but a calm and deliberate awareness, the ability to observe your emotions as they arise, to consider, and then to decide when, how, and whether to reveal them. This is not coldness. On the contrary, it is the reclamation of your agency. Emotional discipline is not about suppressing what makes you human. It's about refusing to hand over your inner treasures to the first person who knocks. Imagine a life where you are no longer ridiculously predictable. The manipulator's usual tricks lose their power if you are not instantly stirred to action by guilt or flattery. Suppose, for a moment, you do not rush in to fix or comfort when provoked, but instead pause, look inward, and ask, is this genuine, or am I being drawn into someone else's game? Visualize the internal shift that comes with this practice, a serenity born of no longer dancing to the unspoken music of another's emotional cues. What might it feel like to possess your energy so completely that you lend it only when you choose, not when you are coerced? To reach this liberation, you must guard your empathy as a rare and precious resource. Let it be earned, not assumed. Just as you would not hand your house keys to a stranger at the door, why should your emotional attention be available on demand to anyone with a plaintive look? You have a right, a responsibility even, to protect your emotional peace from manipulation. This is not selfishness, it is self-respect. If you keep giving without discernment, soon there is nothing left to give, and worse, you train people to expect your exhaustion as their entitlement. Let's be clear. You are not obligated to drain yourself for others, nor to respond to every emotional provocation hurled your way. Withdrawing your energy does not make you cruel. Rather, it draws the curtains back on the illusion of control. The manipulator, finding no purchase, must confront reality. They cannot command what you do not freely offer. In that pause, in that chosen inaction, you reveal the truth of who holds the reins of your life. And so, as you step out into the world tomorrow and beyond, I invite you to strive for emotional clarity, resilience, and yes, a certain untouchability. Not for the sake of becoming hardened or indifferent, but for your own protection. In an era overflowing with psychological warfare, where empathy can be weaponized and your boundaries relentlessly tested, let your watchfulness be a mark of wisdom, not cynicism. Ask yourself, with heart and mind awake, what does it mean to empathize truly, to love and care without surrendering the sovereignty of your spirit? What boundaries will you set so that your compassion nourishes rather than depletes? The answers are not simple, and maybe they never will be. But perhaps that's the point. To wrestle, to reflect, and to claim the freedom that comes not from closing your heart, but from making it, at last, truly your own.